Hello again, everybody. This is Josh Morales from Falafel Software, and I want to thank you for joining me for another developer video on Unity and HoloLens. In this quick video, I wanted to take a brief look at the Holo Toolkit available on GitHub. Now, I had mentioned this toolkit before, but only in the context of the project that they gave us at Build, which contained a lot of these assets. But all of the previous projects that I built have used that particular copy of the toolkit. And what I wanted to do was kind of move forward by making sure that I always have access to the latest version of that toolkit. And I figured the best way to do that was to just go ahead and get a copy of the repo and clone it into my system so that I don't expect to be doing any kind of pull requests, as the Unity assets are quite complex. But at the very least, I'll always be able to have the latest versions, and I can kind of merge those in as I need them, or just always make sure that I'm up to date. So if you haven't looked at this toolkit, I definitely encourage you to go check this out. It is freely available on GitHub and contains a massive assortment of assets, a lot more than I even realized. There's a great collection of utilities and descriptions of what they do. Billboard here will show a hologram so that it's always facing towards the camera, and that's definitely a useful utility to have if you need to have something presented to the user, like a heads-up display or something similar. So yeah, there's a whole wide assortment of things in here. Now, the input managers are really important, and we'll be using these a lot more, as these are responsible for allowing the user to see, most importantly, a cursor in front of them that will represent their gaze, so that they can select things by, of course, looking at them through the device and having a cursor to select them. And it takes care of interacting with the holograms in the world, as well as the spatially mapped room around you. So that's really handy to have, so that it can recognize things like gestures and pass those on to your objects, so that your users can interact with them through the HoloLens. In addition, obviously, there's a spatial mapping component, which is going to be key to the HoloLens device being aware of the room, of the world around it, as well as the collider, which is going to be especially important as we move forward into really creating holograms that interact with the world, especially with the next video that I'm planning, in which we adapt the existing Unity tutorials so that they run in the HoloLens environment, and rather than kind of existing in this kind of pseudo three-dimensional game that you're looking into as a player, they will be superimposed in the world around you. And of course, the spatial mapping collider is going to be key to that. So there's definitely a lot of stuff going on here. Plane finding is also important, which I only briefly looked at this. Still a lot of information to absorb, but it's helpful in allowing you to identify surfaces like tables and floors and walls, so that you can actually attach things to them rather than just placing them at a specific coordinate. So we'll definitely be looking a lot deeper into all of these utilities. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of them. It's definitely worth your time to investigate them. But that being said, I definitely want to go ahead and make use of these very quickly, just to see how easy it is to create a new project, reference these assets, and be able to kind of have that workflow going forward, so that I always have a project ready to go with these assets and everything needed for the HoloLens. So the first thing I want to do is, so I've already cloned the repo here and have a copy of the latest version. What I want to do now is proceed to Unity, specifically the version for HoloLens. And I'll create a really simple project and just call it Holo Toolkit. And since we are creating this project with the toolkit assets, I'm going to go ahead and just clear out the world from any of the preloaded assets. So rather than importing the assets here one by one, and there also is not a custom package of the assets that I'm aware, I think the easiest thing to do is going to be to just go into the folder of the assets from the toolkit itself and copy the toolkit contents over to my project. So I'll just leap into my Holo Toolkit project in the assets and paste those in. So now when I flip back to Unity, I should see those assets being imported. Great. And here they are. I think I may not have needed to copy the whole thing. I'm not sure the meta files would be regenerated by themselves by the toolkit. But whatever the case is, here is our toolkit with all of the assets. So what we want to do first is obviously place the camera, and that is in the utilities under prefabs. Yes. So here's the main camera. We'll go ahead and add that to the world, and as we expect, we get the camera preview with the, let's go to the inspector here, solid colored clear flags in the background of black. So perfect. So the next thing that I want to do is add the spatial mapping component. And I think into prefabs, yes. So here we got the spatial mapping prefab, and I'm going to go ahead and add this to the world as well. Now, what this is going to do is on launch map the world in which the HoloLens resides so that that information is available to the application. Now, by default, it looks like the draw visual meshes is enabled, which we want in this case, because I definitely want to be able to see them. I think in the examples and documentation that I have read so far, this kind of gets toggled on and off as needed for placement of objects in the world around you. So if you are, especially in the emulator, where you're not actually in a real world, where you can see these meshes, or rather the visual representation of those meshes is not as important, then I would imagine that would just be left off by default. But in the emulator, you definitely want to be able to see where you're placing an item. So that's why we've got this enabled by default, and it's going to render this material. Let's see, that is located here. And so you can see here that we just got a simple wireframe material that will be used to render the spatially mapped world that the HoloLens sees. So that being said, I think the last thing that I want to do is I also want to go ahead and try to show the cursor. So that is under the input section, and what I want to do is show the cursor here. And I also, so we have a cursor manager, and we have obviously it adds the cursor on hologram, which is a ring here that you can hopefully see, and then the cursor off hologram, which uses a material to kind of show a different icon, so you can kind of see it differentiates when you're actually on a hologram versus when you're not on a hologram, and you'll be able to see which items you can actually interact with. Now, I believe in order for us to actually be able to track where this is going, we do need to have a gaze manager on the project. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a quick empty game object and add it here to the top. And I think I want to add the gaze manager. And what this does is, if we look at the scripts for the cursor, the script is a cursor manager, it actually, let's see, I thought that it referenced the gaze manager here. Yes, here we are. So you can see here in the preview of the script, this actually does reference the gaze manager instance in order to determine where the user is looking. So in order for that to work, we do need to have the gaze manager present. So I'm just going to go ahead and add this to the game object so that it is in our world and accessible. And I'm going to go ahead and save this scene, and we'll just call this, again, under the assets, we'll just call it Hello Toolkit Scene. And then finally, I think we're ready. Oh, you know what? I think just for good measure, I'll go ahead and add just a cube so that there's a little something to look at while this is in the world, besides just the mesh that gets hopefully rendered. And I'll go ahead and get a little bit of rotation just so that it looks a little interesting, and also in preparation for the next video where we'll be using this cube a lot more. So we'll save that again and go to the build settings. So there's one thing. Okay, so I'll go ahead and select the store, switch to that platform, configure it for Universal 10, and Direct 3D, and build the projects. And of course, finally, add the open scene for the Holo Toolkit. Now, there's one more thing that we have to remember to do, and this keeps getting me every time I'm tinkering with Unity and HoloLens, and that is that we need to adjust the player settings for the store to enable the virtual reality component. And that's under, again, the player settings, the store icon, under other settings. and we need to make sure that we check virtual reality supported and that Windows holographic is shown. If we don't do this, as we saw in the previous video, rather than being immersed in the 3D world, this will render as a 2D app in that kind of XAML container as a regular 2D XAML apps load. So you'd always want to make sure that you set this up so that it is the 3D world you expect. Besides that, there is an additional setting under Project Settings Quality for the Windows Store option here that the default should be fastest. And this is again from the documentation, and we looked at that in the previous video. So now we have everything ready. I believe we can go ahead and proceed to build this. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll select the folder to contain the project and go. Great, so our project is built. We'll go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio. And as always, we'll make sure that we flip our build settings to be x86 and select the emulator from the device list. Go ahead and build the project and finally launch it in the emulator. There we go. All right, so let's see what happens. There is our cube, and if we pull back from it, first of all, we can see that our cursor is now visible, and we can see as we move from being on the hologram to being off the hologram that we definitely get a different appearance. So that definitely worked. Great. So what I don't see is the spatially mapped world around me. So I think I may have missed a step somewhere. So at least we got halfway through. Let me go back to my project and see if I can identify what I might have done wrong. And just to be sure, you know what? Better idea would be to open the device portal. Make sure that I actually am looking at a world. So in this case, I don't see actually anything around me. I've updated. I've got the show mesh. Oh, there it is. There's the world. Okay, so I did move away from it. So there's my world, and if I go back to the emulator, I should actually be seeing that mesh in front of me, and I do not. So as I move closer, you can see one interesting thing I kind of noticed that I thought was worth pointing out is that you can see as I step further away that the cursor is no longer recognizing the hologram. And that is because in the configuration for the cursor manager, we can see that our max gaze distance is 15 units. And apparently on this distance, we are not close enough. As we get a little closer, though, you'll see that the cursor does indeed change to match the expected behavior of being in range of that hologram. So that's an interesting thing to note. However, as I look at the 3D view, I do see that although this thing is following me, I do not see the world. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the debugger, and I'm going to see if I can figure out what is happening with the mesh spatial mapping. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this, take a little bit of investigation, and I'll report back when I have identified the problem. So stand by, thanks. Okay, so after a little bit of investigation, a bit more reading, and a lot more tinkering, I was able to discover what I did wrong. At first I thought there was something wrong with my spatial mapping component, either that I was missing a script or a supporting script was not placed in the scene, but indeed the visual messages was checked, which is the only requirement for getting the spatial map to do its function. But in order for the application to actually do it, there is an additional property in the player settings that needs to be set. And before I go into it, it's definitely a stark reminder, for me at least, that because I'm not starting from that base project that was provided in build, there's a lot of things that I need to be aware of that need to be changed for a project that's opened or created rather in Unity fresh, because there's a lot of configurations that are required for the HoloLens that are not set by default. In this case, the setting that we need is actually a capability, very similar to the app manifest here in Visual Studio for store apps, where you've got a list of capabilities that you need to enable. There is a corresponding list of these same type of capabilities in Unity, and the one that we need specifically is spatial perception. Because this was not checked, I was not able to use it, and I didn't get any error message or any kind of indication that anything was wrong or missing or misconfigured. But doing a bit of research, I did locate here in this document, spatial mapping in Unity, which does specify that in the player settings that we do need to have the spatial perception available in the capabilities list. Now, interestingly enough, I did not find this link. I only found this link by doing some searches about spatial mapping and mesh rendering of the room, and specifically that specifically linked to this particular page. However, when I went into the documentation, especially in the sections of Unity, there really isn't anything linking to that page. And looking through the different available items in this kind of table of contents thing, I really didn't find any of the that specific page. And this isn't the first time that happened. However, on the right, I did discover this site index. So by clicking see all pages, I did discover there's a whole lot more information here than is linked in that first table of contents. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at this and go down the line and fill in a lot of the gaps that you probably, like I certainly was, missing. And that specific page is linked here, spatial mapping in Unity. And so by enabling that here in the 3D view, now we can see that we're looking on into our room. And actually, I'm a little bit, I think, behind it. But as I switch now to the emulator, you can see here we do render the mesh outline of the room. So now, as I move around with the Xbox controller, I am now in and out of the room. And you can see some of the different objects on which we can place things or interact with are holograms. Now, in this case, my cube is kind of outside of the room. If I leave the room and pan around to the back of it, let's see if I can find my cube. It's around here somewhere. Where did you go, cube? Is it about my cube? There it is. So my cube's a little outside of the world, but it's here, and you can see. And then as we kind of pull away, that the room kind of takes a little bit more of a shape. And of course, the longer that you stay in the room, the more the HoloLens is able to map the surroundings. But yeah, I think this kind of showcases the mesh render, which can be really helpful for the emulation and to see how your rendered objects are going to interact with the world around you. And hopefully we'll get to that soon. I'm still trying to get to the point where I can place objects onto these meshes and then, of course, make them go away, since we don't want to be seeing these meshes when we actually wear the device. But, one step at a time. For now, I think that this is a good place to stop. We've got the mesh rendered. We can see what the room looks like. We've got an object in there alongside the mesh. Now the next step is to actually build something interesting. So I think the Hello World stuff is mostly behind us. The next thing I really would want to do is dive into the tutorials in the Unity 3D and try to see if I can adapt them so that they can kind of make sense in this 3D device. So we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, I want to thank you for joining me again here. This is again Josh Morales at Falafel Software. And you can reach me on Twitter at celeron.net. And share what you're working on with HoloLens. Let me know if you missed any glaring issues other than the ones that I've been able to identify. One more thing I wanted to check while I'm here, which is, does my gaze cursor react to the world? I forgot to check that, and it's sure enough it does. I'm not sure how well this comes out on the video. I'll get a little bit closer, but you can see here that blue cursor, as I move off, does change back into the non-cursor, just like it did with the cube. So that's pretty cool. So this cursor is, I guess, world aware, and as I kind of pull away, it has that same limitation of 15 units, I think. So if I get far enough away, it's gonna kind of stay as that purple object that represents, non-holograms. But as I get closer, then we do kind of get that interactivity of getting that cursor to reveal it is an actual detected object, in this case a world object, that represented by that mesh. So we'll definitely look at that a little bit closer. Sorry, I was already on my way out. So thanks again for watching. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, I hope this was helpful. Have a good day. Thanks. Goodbye.